billionaire father disguises himself as a beggar to find a mother for his son. But a cleaning lady does something incredible. The afternoon air was warm and smelled of cut grass and sunscreen, a mixture that should have meant joy and fun. For Richard, however, the scene of the sunny playground was just a frame for his son's loneliness. Sitting on a wooden bench, with his stock portfolio rising on his phone, he couldn't take his eyes off Daniel. At 5 years old, the boy should have been at the top of the slide, screaming with euphoria, or digging a hole in the sand with the determination of an engineer. Instead, he was standing by the fence, his small hands clutching the wire mesh, watching. His gaze wasn't lost on the horizon. It was focused, almost studying. He saw Lucas, a classmate, who had tripped and scraped his knee. In seconds, Lucas's mother was there, kneeling on the grass, cleaning the cut with a wipe and covering the wound with a gentle kiss. Daniel watched every movement, his head slightly tilted, as if trying to memorize a sacred ritual to which he did not belong. Soon after, he saw little Sophie being lifted into the air by her mother, spinning amidst infectious laughter. Every hug, every laugh, every gesture of affection exchanged between mothers and children seemed to deepen Daniel's quietness. Richard felt a familiar pang in his chest, a sense of failure that none of his billions could soothe. He was a titan in the business world, a man whose signature was worth fortunes and whose decisions shaped the market. He could buy islands, private jets, and skyscrapers. But there, in that simple playground, he was powerless, unable to buy the one thing his son seemed to long for: a mother's warmth. Finally, Daniel moved away from the fence and walked slowly toward his father. His shoulders were slumped, and his steps lacked the bouncy energy of a child. Richard locked his phone and forced a smile, preparing to offer a popsicle or a trip to the movies, the solutions he often used to patch up sadness. But Daniel didn't want distractions. He stopped right in front of his father, his big brown eyes fixed on his and asked the question Richard feared most. "Dad," his voice was small, a thread of sound amidst the park's cacophony, "why don't I have a mom like the other boys?" The question hung in the air, simple, direct, and devastating. It hit Richard with the force of a physical blow, knocking the wind out of him. The world around seemed to go silent. The laughter of the other children became a distant hum. All he could hear was the echo of those words in his mind. He pulled Daniel onto his lap, the boy's small, warm body serving as a fragile anchor in his internal storm. What could he say? The truth was complex, bitter, and entirely unsuitable for the ears of a 5-year-old child. His mind, treacherous, dragged him through a parade of recent memories, all starring women who seemed to have stepped off the same magazine cover. Blonde, light-eyed, sculpturally beautiful, with smiles that never reached their eyes. He remembered Jessica 3 months ago. She had insisted on a family outing on the yacht. Daniel was beaming, excited about the sea, when a wave splashed salt water onto the deck, soaking everyone. Daniel laughed out loud, a pure, childish laugh. Jessica, on the other hand, let out a sharp cry. "My hair! Richard, this dress is pure silk." She spent the rest of the afternoon pouting, taking selfies at angles that hid her slightly damp hair and completely ignoring the boy who just wanted to show her a dolphin he saw in the distance. Her love was for the scenery, not the people in it. Then came Chloe, the architect. She seemed different, more serious, but her coldness was even worse. One night, Daniel woke up crying from a nightmare. Richard was holding him, calming him down, when Chloe appeared at the bedroom door, her face covered in a green beauty mask. "Can't you just shut his door?" she hissed. "I need my beauty sleep." I didn't sign up for part-time babysitting. That night, Richard realized that the immense, minimalist house Chloe praised so much was a perfect reflection of her. Cold, empty, and with no room for the lovely chaos a child brings. And, of course, there was Sarah, the model. She was perhaps the most superficial of all. She tried to play the cool stepmom, but her effort was painfully fake. One time, Daniel spent the whole morning creating a colorful drawing of a lion for her. He ran to her, the paper held out proudly. "Look, Sarah, it's for you." Sarah, too busy editing a photo for her social media, took the drawing without even looking. "Ah, how lovely, sweetie," she said distractedly, setting Daniel's masterpiece aside to use as a coaster for her glass of iced water, which left a condensation ring in the middle of the lion. Richard saw the light in Daniel's eyes fade in that instant. It was the last time Sarah set foot in his house. They were always like that. Women attracted to the glitter of his wealth, to the promise of a carefree life. They loved the name Richard, the billionaire. They loved the gifts, the trips, the status. But Daniel was a reminder that life with Richard came with responsibilities, with a love that needed to be given, not just received. And they were incapable of giving that love. The affection they offered was calculated, performative, and never, ever genuine. "Son," Richard began, his voice hoarse, struggling to find a path through his own frustration. "It's complicated. But know that I love you more than anything in this world." "I know, Dad," Daniel replied, laying his head on his shoulder. But a dad isn't a mom. That simple, true sentence was the final blow. Richard understood. He had built an empire but failed to build a home. His fortune, instead of being a blessing, had become a curse, a beacon that attracted only empty, self-interested ships. He was trapped in a cycle of superficial relationships, and his son was paying the price. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, a sharp clarity washed over Richard. He couldn't go on like this. He couldn't bring another Jessica or Chloe into Daniel's life. He needed something real. He needed someone who didn't know about his bank account, who didn't care about the car he drove or the brand of his watch. He needed to find a woman with a pure heart, someone who would see a man, not an ATM, who would see a boy, not an inconvenience, someone who could offer a kiss on a scraped knee and feel the joy, not the irritation, of a splash of seawater. The decision solidified in his soul. He would change his strategy. He would do whatever it took to find this person, even if it meant turning his world upside down. Daniel's smile, a true and happy smile, was worth more than his entire empire. And Richard, for the first time, was ready to invest his entire life to earn it. The decision made under the orange sky of the playground was one thing. The execution, however, was something else entirely. The next morning, instead of putting on one of his tailored Italian suits, Richard found himself in a small rented apartment on the less glamorous side of the city, a place he kept for occasions that required total anonymity. Facing the mirror, he didn't see the CEO of Innovate Corp. He saw a stranger, a man the world would try hard not to see. The clothes were old and worn, bought from a thrift store, a pair of faded jeans with a rip in the knee, and a washed-out grey sweatshirt with frayed edges. On his feet, old work boots that he had personally dirtied with soil and grease. He ran a sticky gel through his hair, giving it a dirty, unkempt look, and rubbed some theatrical grime on his hands and face, creating the illusion of days without a decent wash. The hardest part was the look in his eyes. He practiced in the mirror, trying to empty his eyes of their usual confidence and power, replacing them with a mixture of weariness and resignation. When he finally went out, he felt a chill. It wasn't just a disguise, it was like wearing the skin of invisibility. He chose the city square, a melting pot of lives that intersected without ever touching. Rushed executives passed by, talking loudly on their phones. Tourists clustered to take pictures of the fountain, and mothers pushed strollers while trying to juggle shopping bags. Richard found an empty bench under a large tree and sat down, feeling the weight of hundreds of gazes passing right through him. No one truly saw him. People altered their path to avoid passing too close. A woman instinctively pulled her purse closer to her body. A group of teenagers laughed and pointed in his direction before moving on. To them, he wasn't a man with a story or feelings. He was part of the urban landscape, an obstacle to be avoided, a stain on the city's postcard. For the first time in his adult life, Richard felt what it was like to be judged and dismissed based solely on appearance. The experience was deeply humiliating and, at the same time, strangely enlightening. All his power, his influence, his money, meant absolutely nothing here. On that bench, he was less than zero. The hours dragged on. The sun climbed to its peak, heating the concrete of the square. Richard felt real hunger and thirst, but he forced himself to stay in character. He watched the people, trying to guess their stories, imagining their lives. He was about to give up, to conclude that his plan was a naive folly when he saw her. She wasn't the type of woman who would have caught his attention in his normal life. She wore a simple blue cleaner's uniform and practical shoes. Her hair was pulled back in a functional ponytail, and her face was makeup-free. She looked tired, with subtle dark circles under her eyes, but there was a softness to her features. She walked to the bench across from his, sat down with a sigh, and took a small paper-wrapped package from her bag. Richard expected her to ignore him like everyone else, but after unwrapping her sandwich, she looked directly at him. Not with pity, nor with disgust, but with simple, direct acknowledgement. Their eyes met for an instant. Richard felt the urge to look away, but something in her calmness made him hold her gaze. Then she did something that shocked him. She stood up, walked over to him, and held out half of her sandwich. "You look hungry," she said, her voice soft and unpretentious. Richard was speechless. He looked at the sandwich, simple bread, cheese, and ham, and then at her face. It was the first time anyone had spoken to him in hours. He took the sandwich, his hand trembling slightly. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice hoarse from disuse. Instead of walking away, she went back to her bench and started eating her half. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was a shared silence, a small pause in the middle of the city's chaos. "My name is Emily," she said after a few minutes, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to talk to a stranger in the square. "Rick," he replied, using the nickname he hadn't heard in years. They talked. Or rather, she talked and he listened, asking short questions. Emily told him she worked cleaning one of the enormous office buildings surrounding the square. She spoke about her day, about how exhausting it was, about the smell of cleaning products that never seemed to leave her hands. Richard listened, fascinated. She spoke of her simple life with a dignity that moved him. At one point, Richard, still in his role as Rick, said, "People don't even look at me. It's like I don't exist." Emily gave a small, sad smile and shook her head in understanding. "I know what that's like," she said, looking at the imposing glass building where she worked. "At my job, I'm invisible too. I spend hours cleaning the desks, the bathrooms, the hallways. People walk past me as if I were a piece of furniture. They only remember I exist when a mistake is made, like if someone's trash wasn't emptied or if the floor is still wet. Otherwise, it's as if the place cleans itself by magic." She sighed, a soft, tired sound. "It's a strange feeling, knowing you're essential for the place to run, but at the same time being completely forgotten by everyone there." Her words hit Richard with unexpected force. Invisible, forgotten, remembered only for mistakes. She was describing her life as a cleaner, but she was also, without knowing it, perfectly describing how he felt at that very moment, disguised as a beggar. For the first time, he felt a genuine connection, an empathy that didn't come from a position of power or pity. There on that bench, they were just two invisible people sharing a moment of visibility. She asked for nothing in return. She didn't want money, didn't ask invasive questions. She just shared her lunch and her story. When her break was over, she stood up, gathered the sandwich wrapper, and smiled at him. "Well, I have to go now. Take care, Rick." And with that, she was gone, disappearing back into the flow of people. Richard sat for a long time, holding the rest of the sandwich she had given him. It tasted of bread and cheese, but to him, it tasted of the purest and most unexpected kindness. That day, he had set out to find someone with a pure heart. And there, in the midst of the city's indifference, he might have just found her. That first meeting wasn't an isolated event. For Richard, it became a necessity. The next day he returned to the square, his heart heavy with uncertainty. He sat on the same bench, disguised and anonymous, feeling like a fool. Why would she come back? What was he, after all, but a stranger she had helped out of pity? But then, at the same time, he saw her approaching. The relief that washed over him was so intense, he almost forgot to maintain his dejected posture. Emily smiled when she saw him, a genuine smile that seemed to warm the air around her. "I thought I'd bring extra today," she said, handing him a small red apple along with half of her sandwich. And so a quiet ritual began. The meetings became frequent, the high point of Richard's meticulously planned day. He would leave meetings where he negotiated the fate of multi-million-dollar companies, get into his luxury car, drive to the anonymous apartment, and transform into Rick. He discovered that he longed for that hour on the park bench more than for any deal closed or profit made. There, stripped of his wealth and power, he felt more like himself than ever before. As the days went by, Emily began to open up. She didn't complain, but she spoke of her life with a disarming honesty. Richard learned about her struggles, not as a list of grievances, but as facts of life that she faced with a quiet strength. She mentioned the long hours of work, the fatigue that settled into her bones at the end of the day, and the constant worry about a higher electricity bill or an unexpected home repair. "Some days, your body just wants to stay in bed," she admitted once as they watched children play in the fountain. "But then I remember that if I don't go, the work doesn't get done." There's a certain dignity in that, I think, in being someone who can be counted on. This was the essence of Emily. Even amidst her difficulties, she carried an unshakable faith and hope. She didn't speak of religion, but of a deep belief in decency and the value of hard work. She found joy in the simplest things: the taste of a ripe peach, the kindness of a bus driver who waited for her, the peaceful silence of the city before dawn when she left for work. One afternoon, after a long silence, she shared something that struck Richard deeply. "You know, it's funny," she began with a melancholic half-smile. "At my job, I spend all day cleaning up other people's messes. I make sure everything is perfect so they can work in peace. And most of the time, I'm completely invisible. People walk past me in the hall and their eyes go right through me, like I'm a wall." He listened, captivated, feeling a knot form in his throat. "Last week, the coffee machine in the executive break room broke. I spent almost an hour cleaning the sticky floor, making sure everything was spotless. No one said a word, no one even noticed. But yesterday, I accidentally left a small smudge of dust on one of the glass tables. In less than 10 minutes, my supervisor received an email complaint about the quality of the service." She looked at him, and in her eyes was a clarity that cut to the soul. "That's when I realize it. Sometimes I think they only remember me when I make a mistake. Otherwise, it's like I don't exist. My existence in their world is only confirmed by a failure." Her words hung in the air. For Emily's, it was a moment of venting, an observation about her life. For Richard, it was a revelation. He, one of the most visible and powerful men in the world, felt the exact same way. The women from his past and his business partners, the media, did they see him? No. They saw his status, his success, his bank account, and they were always there to point out his failures. An investment that went wrong, a mistaken market forecast. But the man behind it all, with his own doubts and longings, was invisible. In that moment, Richard felt a wave of emotion so strong he had to look away. Tears threatened to well up in his eyes. This woman, with her cleaner's uniform and her simple lunch, saw him more clearly than anyone in his life. She didn't see Rick, the beggar. She saw a companion, a soul with whom she could share her innermost thoughts. She saw him simply as an equal. Someone was finally seeing him beyond any appearance, be it that of a billionaire or a homeless man. This realization sparked a deep internal conflict. The gratitude he felt for Emily quickly turned into something deeper, warmer. It was an admiration for her strength, an affection for her kindness, a tender feeling he recognized as the beginning of something he had long given up on finding. He was falling in love with her, and that realization terrified him. How could he nurture this feeling that was at its core based on a lie? Every smile she gave him, every piece of bread she shared, was a gift for Rick, a man who didn't exist. The pure joy of their meetings now came with a bitter taste of guilt. He felt like a fraud. He who had started this disguise to find someone with a pure heart was now deceiving the most genuine person he had ever met. The idea of revealing his true identity was paralyzing. He imagined the look of betrayal on her face, the way the compassion in her eyes would turn to contempt. She would hate him, and rightly so. She would think he was mocking her, that her simple life was just entertainment for a bored rich man. The precious, fragile connection they had built would be pulverized the instant the truth was spoken. The secret that protected him was also his prison. He was trapped between the happiness of being seen for who he was on the inside and the fear of being hated for who he was on the outside. And with each passing day, with each meeting in the square, his feelings for Emily grew, and the weight of the lie became more unbearable. The weeks turned into a month, then two. The leaves on the trees in the square began to change color, shifting from the vibrant green of summer to the golden and reddish hues of autumn. For Richard, each falling leaf was like a grain of sand in an hourglass, marking the time passing in his double life and the deepening of a feeling that was becoming increasingly dangerous. His attachment to Emily was no longer a simple affection. It was the center of gravity of his existence. The business world, once the stage for all his ambitions, now seemed like a puppet theater, with empty characters reciting predictable lines. He would sit in board meetings, surrounded by profit projection charts and men in expensive suits, but his mind was miles away, on a wooden bench in a square, wondering what story Emily would tell him that day. Once, during a tense merger negotiation, the CEO of the other company accused him of not paying attention. He was right. Richard wasn't hearing the terms of the contract. He was remembering Emily's laugh as she told him about a cheeky squirrel that tried to steal her lunch the day before. That sound, pure and genuine, was more valuable to him than the billions of dollars at stake in that room. He began to notice the smallest details about her, the small scar above her right eyebrow, the way she crinkled her nose when something amused her, the worn soles of her work shoes, a silent testament to the miles she walked every day. He realized he knew more about Emily's soul than about any of the women with whom he had spent years of his life. They had shown him their closets full of designer clothes. Emily showed him her heart. What terrified and amazed him in equal measure was the purity of her generosity. Emily never asked for anything. Ever. Her presence in Rick's life was an act of continuous, unconditional giving. She shared what she had, not because she had extra, but because it was her nature. For her, sharing a sandwich or a story was as natural as breathing. One day the weather turned suddenly. A cold front swept through the city, bringing an icy wind that cut through the skin. Richard, in his thin sweatshirt disguise, began to shiver uncontrollably. He was so engrossed in his conversation with Emily that he didn't realize how cold it was until his teeth started chattering. Emily noticed immediately. Without hesitation, she began to unwrap the wool scarf she was wearing, an item that was visibly old but well cared for. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice trembling. "You're colder than I am," she said simply. "Here, wear this." She leaned over and wrapped the soft scarf around his neck. The fabric smelled of simple laundry soap and something that was uniquely her. The immediate warmth he felt was far beyond physical. It was a gesture of care so genuine, so selfless, that a lump formed in Richard's throat. There he was, a man who could buy 1,000 of the world's most expensive scarves, receiving a priceless gift from a woman who barely had enough for herself. That piece of wool represented everything that was missing in his life. In his world, gifts were investments, calculated gestures to get something in return. Emily's gift was just kindness. "I can't accept this," he stammered, feeling like the most fraudulent person on earth. "Nonsense," she replied with a gentle smile. "It's just a scarf. You need it more than I do. Give it back tomorrow." The weight of that simple act of generosity nearly crushed him. The tension, which had been a background discomfort, became a constant, suffocating presence. The secret he kept began to poison the moments he cherished most. Every smile she gave him was tainted by his guilt. Every confidence she shared felt like an accusation of his dishonesty. Their growing closeness was becoming dangerous, not for his physical safety, but for his soul. The more he fell in love with her, the more monstrous his lie became. He began to have moments of panic, where the two realities threatened to collide. One time, Emily was talking about the news, casually mentioning a local billionaire who had made a large donation to a hospital. The billionaire was him. "It's good to see the rich doing something good once in a while," she commented unknowingly, "but sometimes I wonder if they really care, or if it's just for show." Their lives are so distant from ours. It's like they live on another planet." Her words were like a punch to Richard's gut. He mumbled an agreement, his heart pounding against his ribs. He was living that lie in front of her, living proof that the distance between their worlds was a chasm. On another occasion, she talked about an ex-boyfriend who had cheated on her. "It wasn't even so much about the other woman," she said, her gaze lost in memory. "It was the lie. I hate lies, Rick. I'd rather have a hard truth that hurts me all at once than a comfortable lie that poisons me slowly. For me, trust is everything. Once you break it, there's no fixing it." He felt his blood run cold. Every word was a sentence for his own condemnation. He was living the very definition of what she despised most. The man for whom she was developing clear affection was a walking lie. He knew the situation was unsustainable. The secret was becoming too heavy to carry. The joy of being with her was being suffocated by the constant fear of discovery. He couldn't go on like this, but the alternative was terrifying. Telling the truth meant risking the loss of the only person who had ever truly seen him, the only light in his empty life. The dangerous proximity wasn't just him getting closer to her. It was the truth getting closer to the surface, bubbling under the thin layer of his disguise, ready to erupt and destroy everything. He was trapped. Every day he remained silent was another step toward the precipice, and he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that the fall would be devastating. It was a Tuesday morning, just like so many others in Emily's life. The air in the hallway of the 42nd floor of the Sterling building was thin and quiet, smelling of floor polish and the subtle aroma of gourmet coffee wafting from the offices. Emily moved her mop in slow, rhythmic arcs over the gleaming marble, a job she did on autopilot. Her body was there, but her mind was far away, on a bench in a square, anticipating her lunch break. She smiled to herself, thinking of Rick, thinking of how, as over the past few months, the conversations with that man with kind eyes and worn clothes had become the brightest part of her grey days. He listened to her in a way no one ever had, and his calm presence was a balm for her loneliness. The soft chime of the elevator arriving woke her from her daydream. A group of men in dark suits and expensive shoes stepped out, their deep, confident voices echoing in the silent hallway. They were the invisible men for whom she cleaned, the executives who barely noticed her existence. As always, Emily shrank back, pulling her cleaning cart into a corner so as not to be in the way, lowering her head to become even smaller, even more a part of the furniture. They walked past her, engrossed in their conversations about profit margins and hostile takeovers, but then one voice stood out from the rest, a voice she knew as well as her own. Their voice that calmed her, that made her smile, that belonged to her lunch hours. "We'll have to be aggressive on the proposal, John. There's no other way." Emily's heart stopped. The mop slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a dull thud that sounded like a thunderclap in the silence that had fallen over her mind. Slowly, with a dread she couldn't name, she lifted her gaze, and there he was. In the center of the group, leading the way, was Rick, but it wasn't him. This man wore a navy blue suit that probably cost more than she earned in a year. His hair, which she knew as unkempt and lifeless, was perfectly styled. His face, hung which she knew with the shadow of a stubble, was clean-shaven and smooth. The tired, stooped posture had been replaced by an aura of power and command that seemed to bend the air around him. But the eyes were the same. They were Rick's eyes, and they found hers. For a split second, Richard's world also stopped. In the midst of his environment of power and wealth, he saw her, Emily, there in her work uniform, her face pale with shock, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and pain. All the blood seemed to drain from his face. His worst nightmare was coming true in the worst possible way. He opened his mouth to say something, her name, anything, but no sound came out. One of the executives beside him, noticing his hesitation, followed his gaze. "Is there a problem, Mr. Sterling?" the man asked. "Mr. Sterling." The name hit Emily like a slap. Sterling. The name of the building. Richard Sterling, the tech genius. The reclusive billionaire whose picture she had vaguely seen in magazines. The beggar with whom she had shared her bread, her time and her soul, was one of the richest men on the planet. The reality of the situation crushed her, The kindness she had offered, the compassion she had felt, it all seemed like a cruel joke. She wasn't a friend, she was a social experiment, a diversion for a bored billionaire. Humiliation burned in her cheeks, hot and painful. All their conversations, all their confidences flashed through her mind, now tainted, distorted by the cold light of truth. He had deceived her, he had used her. She couldn't breathe. Without thinking, she turned and ran. She left the cart, the mop, everything behind and fled down the hallway, tears blurring her vision. She only stopped when she found the safety of a small supply closet, where she locked herself in the darkness, the smell of bleach filling her lungs as sobs tore through her throat. That day, for the first time in months, the bench in the square was empty at lunchtime. Richard went no longer in disguise, feeling naked and exposed. He waited, but she didn't come. He went back the next day, and the next. The silence of her absence was a deafening scream. Each day without her was a torment, a confirmation that he had destroyed the purest and most real thing he had ever had. He tried calling the cleaning company for information, but they refused to share employee data. Desperate, he knew there was only one way. He had to face her, as himself, and beg her to listen. After nearly a week of agony, he waited for her outside the building at the end of her shift. When Emily saw him standing near the exit, wearing casual but undeniably expensive clothes, her face hardened into a cold, impenetrable mask. She tried to swerve past him, but he moved, gently blocking her path. "Emily, please," he said, his voice hoarse with desperation. "Please, just give me 5 minutes. I have nothing to say to you, mister." "Sterling," she replied, her voice sharp, refusing to look him in the eye. "Please," he insisted, the pain in his voice making her hesitate for a moment. "I know what I did is unforgivable. I know I hurt you in a way that may never be fixed. But I'm begging you, just hear me out. After that, if you want me to disappear from your life forever, I will." She finally stopped, her arms crossed tightly against her chest, a barrier against him. She said nothing, but she also didn't leave. It was the only invitation he needed. He poured his heart out, the words tumbling out in a torrent of honesty and regret. "I don't know where to begin except to say I'm sorry. I'm sorrier than words can express," he began, his voice choked with emotion. "None of this was a game. You weren't an experiment. It was the most desperate search of my life." He told her about his son, Daniel. He told her about the sadness in the eyes of a 5-year-old boy who just wanted a mother's hug. He described the succession of superficial women who had passed through their lives, women who saw Daniel as an accessory or an inconvenience, women who were only interested in his fortune. "I was losing my son, Emily. He was closing himself off from the world, and I didn't know how to reach him. I have all the money in the world, but I couldn't buy the one thing he needed, real love, affection that didn't come with a price tag." He looked at her, pleading for her to see the truth in his eyes. "I was desperate. I realized my wealth was a curse, a filter that attracted the exact wrong kind of person. So I had this idea, this crazy, stupid idea. If I could get rid of my money, my identity, maybe I could find someone with a pure heart who could love a person for who they are, not what they have. Someone who could look at my son and see a boy who needs love." He paused, swallowing hard. "That's what I was looking for when I went to that square. I wasn't looking for you specifically. I was looking for someone like you, and then you appeared. You shared your lunch with a stranger. You treated me with dignity, with kindness. You saw me." Tears were now streaming freely down Richard's face. "What started as a plan for my son became something more. You became the most important person in my life. The moments I spent with you on that bench were the most real and honest of my entire adult life. I fell in love with you, Emily, for your strength, your integrity, your soul, and the lie was killing me. I swear I was going to tell you, but I was a coward. I was so afraid of losing you." He fell silent, his heart laid bare, waiting for his sentence. Emily listened without a word, her face still unreadable. The initial anger had given way to a storm of conflicting emotions. The pain of betrayal was still there, but the agony in his voice, the mention of his son, it all confused her. She finally lifted her eyes and met his. He saw the hurt in them, but he also saw something else, something he couldn't decipher. "I need time," she whispered, her voice fragile. And without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone on the sidewalk, his heart in pieces, not knowing if his confession had been a bridge or the final nail in the coffin of everything they'd had. The days following Richard's confession were the longest and quietest of Emily's life. The world, which had seemed to find a new center of color and warmth in the square, reverted to a gray and monotonous landscape. She continued her routine with the precision of an automaton. She woke up, took the bus, cleaned the hallways and floors of a building that now haunted her, and went back home. But inside, a war was being waged. Her first reaction, which lasted for almost 48 hours, was a cold, sharp anger. The humiliation was the deepest wound. She replayed every encounter in her mind, but now she saw everything through the lens of betrayal. Every piece of bread she shared, every story she told, every smile she offered, it all seemed to have been a spectacle for a man who had the world at his feet. She felt naive, a fool. Mr. Sterling, the name on top of the building, the man whose expensive shoes walked on the floor she polished, had disguised himself as a needy man to laugh at her compassion. It was a cruelty her simple, honest mind could barely process. During lunch, she forced herself to stay in the employee break room, a windowless cubicle that smelled of stale coffee and microwave meals. The space suffocated her, but it was better than facing the square, the empty bench that now looked like a monument to her stupidity. However, as the initial anger began to cool, exhausted by its own intensity, other memories started to surface, like stubborn flowers breaking through concrete. They were the memories of Rick, not of Richard Sterling, the billionaire, but of Rick, the man on the bench. She remembered the way he listened to her, with an attention so complete and genuine it made her feel like the only person in the world. She remembered the real sadness in his eyes when she talked about feeling invisible. That didn't seem like acting. She remembered the tremor in his hand when he accepted the first piece of sandwich, a vulnerability that seemed authentic. Her mind took her back to the cold day she gave him her scarf. She remembered the gratitude and confusion on his face, as if a small act of kindness were an alien concept. An actor might have made a big show of thanks. Perhaps. Rick just stood there, moved and speechless. The emotion felt real. And then there was his confession. In the midst of all the pain, one part of Richard's story refused to be ignored. His son, Daniel, a 5-year-old boy who wanted a mother. The pain in Richard's voice when he spoke of his son was the rawest, most undeniable part of his defense. Emily, who valued family above all else, couldn't erase the image of a desperate father willing to do anything, even something so extreme and misguided, to heal his son's sadness. The battle inside her intensified. Her head, her pride, screamed at her to walk away, to protect herself. "He lied," said reason. "Nothing that begins with such a huge lie can end well. He lives in a world you'll never understand, and you'll always be the cleaner he tricked." But her heart whispered another story. It whispered that the connection they felt was real, regardless of the circumstances. The man she had laughed with whom she had shared comfortable silences, whom she had comforted without knowing his true battles. That man existed. Perhaps Rick wasn't a complete disguise, but rather the truest part of Richard Sterling, the part he kept hidden under layers of wealth and power. After 5 days of torment, Emily looked at herself in the mirror before leaving for work. She saw deep, dark circles and a sadness in her own eyes that scared her. She was punishing herself, closing herself off from the world in the same way she accused others of doing to her. In that moment, she made a decision. It wouldn't be a logical decision, maybe not even the smartest one, but it would be hers. She decided to listen to the quietest yet most insistent part of herself. She decided to listen to her heart. That day at lunchtime, her feet carried her out of the building and toward the square. Every step was heavy with uncertainty. She didn't know if he would be there. Part of her hoped he wouldn't be, so the decision would be made for her. But as she reached the edge of the square, she saw him. He was sitting on their bench, not as the impeccable CEO, nor as the disheveled beggar. He was just Richard. He wore jeans and a simple sweater. He wasn't reading or looking at his phone. He was just sitting, staring at the empty spot beside him, his face marked by exhaustion and sadness. He looked like a man who had lost everything. Emily's heart leaped. She took a deep breath and started walking toward him. Richard saw her when she was just a few feet away. He jumped up, his face transforming with a wave of shock, fear, and above all, a fragile, desperate hope. He said nothing, seeming afraid that a single word might make her disappear. Emily stopped in front of him, the man who was both a complete stranger and the person who knew her best. She looked into his eyes, the same eyes as Rick, and saw her own suffering reflected in them. After a long silence that seemed to contain all the painful days that had passed, she finally spoke. Her voice was not one of anger, nor of total forgiveness, but of a calm and firmness she didn't know she possessed. "I spent the last few days hating you," she began, the honesty hanging between them. "But I also missed my friend from the bench. I don't know who Richard Sterling is, but the man who shared his lunch with me, who listened to my stories, I believe he was real." She paused, gathering all her courage for the next words. "If you promise me that you will never lie to me again about anything, no matter how hard the truth is, I'll agree to meet your son." The words hung in the air. They were not the words of forgiveness he might have expected, but they were something much more valuable. A chance. A conditional, fragile chance, but a chance nonetheless. The emotion hit Richard with the force of a wave. The tension that had been consuming him for days dissolved, replaced by a relief so profound his legs felt weak. Tears welled up in his eyes, and he made no effort to hide them. "I promise, Emily," he said, his voice thick and broken with emotion. "I swear. There will never be another lie between us. I promise." He wanted to hug her, to thank her, but he knew he didn't have that right. Instead, he just stood there, letting the tears of a man who thought he had lost everything stream freely, while a silent, sacred promise settled between them, fragile as glass but bright with the faintest of hopes. 3 days passed since the promise in the square. For Richard, they were 3 days of an anxiety so intense it surpassed any negotiation of his career. For Emily, they were 3 days of an apprehension that left her breathless. The promise was the bridge, but crossing it required a monumental step out of her comfort zone and into a world she did not know. The world of Richard Sterling. On Saturday morning, a discreet but undeniably expensive car pulled up in front of her modest apartment building. Richard was behind the wheel, a decision he made so she wouldn't feel intimidated by a chauffeur. When Emily got in, the smell of leather and the silence of the vehicle's interior enveloped her, a stark contrast to the noise and hustle of the bus she took every day. "Are you okay?" Richard asked, his voice soft, noticing the tension in her hands as they gripped her purse strap. "I'm nervous," she admitted honestly. "Truus, what if he doesn't like me?" Richard looked at her, and for a moment the billionaire disappeared, replaced by the anxious father he was. "Emily, the only thing I ask is that you be yourself. That's why I was looking for you in the first place." The journey to his house was made in a silence heavy with expectation. As they passed through the imposing gates and drove down a long driveway lined with perfectly manicured trees, Emily's heart began to beat faster. The house, if you could even call it that, wasn't a mansion. It was a modern palace of glass, stone, and wood, seamlessly integrated into a landscape of immaculate gardens overlooking the ocean. It was beautiful, but so grand it made her feel like a grain of sand. This place wasn't Rick's home. This was Richard Sterling's empire. Richard led her inside. The interior was equally impressive, with soaring ceilings, minimalist art, and floor-to-ceiling windows that brought the sunlight and the blue of the sea inside. But he didn't give her a tour. He led her directly to a cozier living room, with comfortable sofas, a fireplace, and most importantly, a shelf full of children's books and a toy box in the corner. This was where the real life of the house happened, and that was where Daniel was. The boy was sitting on the rug, his back to them, completely absorbed in a small collection of plastic dinosaurs. He was wearing a t-shirt with a stegosaurus on it and looked even smaller amidst the vastness of the room. "Daniel," Richard called softly. The boy turned, his eyes, large and brown like his father's, widened when he saw Emily. He immediately got up and ran behind Richard's leg, clutching it tightly as he peeked at the stranger with shy curiosity. It was exactly the scene Richard had described, that of a boy who hid from the world. Emily's heart ached. She ignored Richard, ignored the luxurious room, and focused all her attention on that cautious little face. Instead of standing tall and looking like an intimidating giant, she knelt on the soft rug, bringing herself down to his level. "Hello, Daniel," she said, her voice calm and gentle. "My name is Emily." Daniel didn't answer, just blinked. Emily didn't push. Her gaze shifted to the small plastic figure he was still holding tightly in his hand. "Wow, is that a Tyrannosaurus Rex?" she asked, with a tone of genuine interest. "He was always my favorite. He looked so fierce and strong, but I always imagined that deep down he just needed a friend." The tactic worked. Daniel's eyes moved from her to the dinosaur in his hand, as if seeing it in a new way. He took a hesitant step away from his father's leg. "He's the king," Daniel whispered, his first word to her. "He sure is," Emily agreed, smiling. "Do you have other dinosaurs?" Slowly, as if testing the water's safety, Daniel led her to his small army of toys on the rug. He began to point to each one, naming them: the Triceratops, the Velociraptor, the Pterodactyl. Emily listened attentively, asking questions, complimenting his collection, treating those small pieces of plastic with the seriousness and respect they deserved in the eyes of a child. Richard watched it all from a safe distance, his heart in his throat. He leaned against the doorframe, making himself invisible, hopeful. He saw something he hadn't seen in years. He saw his son opening up to a stranger, not out of obligation, but out of genuine interest. Richard's previous girlfriends had either praised Daniel condescendingly, "What a cute little boy you are," or ignored him. None of them had ever knelt on the floor to discuss the virtues of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Emily and Daniel spent almost an hour on the rug. She didn't try to hug him or be overly affectionate. She was simply present, giving him her full, undivided attention. She validated him, and for a boy who felt so small and invisible, that attention was like sunshine. When it was time for Emily to leave, Daniel walked her to the door, this time not hiding behind his father, but beside him. "Will you come back?" he asked, his voice still low but clear. Emily knelt again. "I would love to come back if you and your dad invite me." Daniel looked at Richard with a pleading gaze. Richard, his eyes misty, just nodded. In the days that followed, that first visit turned into a new routine. Emily came to Richard's house 3 then 4 times a week, usually in the late afternoon after her work shift. With each visit, the seed of trust planted in their first meeting grew and blossomed in a way that left Richard in awe. She didn't arrive with expensive gifts or promises of extravagant outings. She arrived with something much more valuable: herself. Her time, her imagination, her patience. Emily discovered that Daniel had a rich inner world, but he rarely shared it. She encouraged him to come out of his shell, not with pressure, but with an invitation. She didn't just read stories to him, she created them with him. They would sit on the floor, surrounded by his toys, and weave epic tales. The T-Rex wasn't just a dinosaur, he was King Rex, a brave leader who protected the smaller dinosaurs from meteors and volcanoes. A toy fire truck became a hero that rescued Legos from burning buildings. In these stories, Daniel was always the hero, the director of the action, and Emily was his enthusiastic partner, always ready for the next adventure. Richard would listen from his office, the sound of his son's laughter echoing through the house for the first time in a very, very long time. She also played with him. For real, Emily wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. They ran through the garden, played ball-y, and built sandcastles in the small playground Richard had built. She taught him how to plant a sunflower seed in a small pot, explaining how the seed needed sun, water, and care to grow strong. It was a subtle but powerful lesson about nurturing and patience, and Daniel cared for his little sprout with touching dedication. He, who was once a quiet and observant child, now ran, shouted, and laughed, the joy of his childhood finally breaking free. But perhaps Emily's most important gift was her ability to listen. One day, Daniel was trying to build a tall and complicated tower of blocks. Inevitably, the tower collapsed. In the past, he would have simply given up, his frustration turning into a silent sadness. But this time, Emily was sitting beside him. He looked at the ruins of his tower, and his lips began to tremble. "It's too hard," he muttered, his eyes filling with tears. Richard, watching from the kitchen, felt the urge to intervene, to say, "Don't cry, son, let's build it again," or to distract him with something else. But Emily did none of that. She moved closer and put a gentle arm around his shoulders. "I know," she said softly. "It's very frustrating when we try so hard and things don't work out, isn't it?" She didn't minimize his pain. She validated it. She sat with him in his frustration. "I feel like that sometimes at my job," she continued. "When I scrub a stain and it won't come out, it makes you want to give up." Daniel looked at her, surprised. This adult was admitting to feeling the same way he did. "But do you know what I do?" she asked. "I take a deep breath, rest for a minute, and then I try a slightly different way. How about we take a deep breath together and then try to build a stronger base for your tower?" He nodded, wiping away his tears, and together they started again. In that moment, watching that simple scene, Richard felt an overwhelming clarity. He finally understood. What Daniel needed wasn't a mother figure to fill a role. He didn't need spoiling, or gifts, or strict discipline. He needed what Emily was giving him so naturally: validation, patience, and the security of knowing that his feelings, big or small, mattered. She wasn't just taking care of him. She was teaching him how to deal with the world. The other women had treated Daniel like a cute puppy or a small obstacle. Emily treated him like a whole person. She offered him respect. The shy, sad boy who used to hide behind his father's legs was disappearing. In his place, a more confident, happier child was emerging, one who smiled easily and wasn't afraid to try and fail. He felt loved, not for being a billionaire's son, but simply for being Daniel. He felt safe. That night, after Emily had left and Daniel was fast asleep, Richard stood on the balcony looking at the stars. He had started this crazy journey to find someone who could give his son love, but he realized he had found much more. Emily wasn't just filling a void in Daniel's life. She was filling a void in both of them, showing them what a real family was. And Richard understood that the calm, gentle presence of this woman was, without a doubt, the greatest fortune he would ever have. Several months had passed since that first tense meeting at the mansion. Autumn had given way to a mild winter, and Emily's presence in Richard's home had become as natural and essential as the sunlight that streamed through the panoramic windows. The transformation in Daniel was nothing short of a miracle in Richard's eyes. The quiet, withdrawn boy had blossomed, becoming a vibrant child full of questions, laughter, and a confidence Richard hadn't seen in him since he was a baby. Richard, for his part, was falling more deeply in love with Emily with each passing day. He loved the woman he had met on the park bench, but now he also loved the woman who patiently taught his son how to tie his shoes, who laughed heartily at his childish jokes, and who had the incredible ability to calm any emotional storm with a hug and gentle words. The promise they made in the square was never broken. The honesty between them was a solid foundation upon which they were cautiously building something new. He knew in his heart that he wanted Emily to be part of their lives forever. He wanted to wake up with her, build a family with her, grow old with her. But a crucial question remained. He had started this whole journey for one reason: his son. And while Daniel's happiness was evident, Richard needed to hear it from him. He needed to know without a shadow of a doubt that this was what Daniel truly wanted. The opportunity for the conversation he so longed for came on a rainy Tuesday evening. Emily had stayed for dinner, and the three of them were in the living room, working on a jigsaw puzzle on the floor. The atmosphere was one of pure domestic bliss. Laughter filled the air as they searched for the right pieces. Daniel, excited, stood up to get a glass of juice from the coffee table. In his haste, his elbow knocked over the glass, spilling the purple liquid onto the cream-colored rug. An instant silence fell over the room. Daniel froze, his eyes wide with fear, staring at the dark stain spreading. In his short life, Mistakes like that usually resulted in sighs of impatience or disapproving looks from his father's previous girlfriends. He instinctively flinched, waiting for the scolding. Richard's heart clenched at his son's reaction, but before he could say anything, Emily acted. She didn't show the slightest hint of irritation. "Oops," she said, with a light and calm voice. "Looks like we had a little juice accident. It happens to the best puzzle explorers." She got up, went to the kitchen, and came back with a damp cloth. She knelt beside Daniel, who still looked petrified. "Don't worry, champ," she said softly, starting to blot the stain. "There's no spill that a little soap and water can't fix. Want to help me fight the grape stain monster?" Daniel looked at her, the tension in his small shoulders melting away. A small smile replaced the fear on his face. He took a corner of the cloth and began to help her. What could have been a moment of stress and shame was transformed by Emily into a lesson in calm and teamwork. Watching the scene, Richard felt an overwhelming clarity. He remembered Jessica, who had once refused to let Daniel eat on the sofa for fear he would stain the silk cushions. He remembered Chloe, who would have summoned the housekeeper with a snap of her fingers, making Daniel feel like a problem to be solved. Emily didn't see a stain on the rug. She saw a child who needed to be reassured. And in that moment, Richard knew he had to ask the question. Later that night, after Emily had gone home and the house was quiet, Richard went up to Daniel's room for their nightly routine. He sat on the edge of the bed, the scent of childhood and the soft glow of a dinosaur nightlight filling the room. He read Daniel's favorite story about a friendly dragon, and when he finished, he closed the book but didn't get up. His heart was pounding. This was by far the most important conversation of his life. "Son," he began, his voice a little lower than usual. "Did you have fun tonight?" "Yes," Daniel said, his eyes shining. "We almost finished the puzzle, and Emily taught me how to make the grape juice disappear." Richard smiled. "She's very good at that, isn't she?" "At making things okay." "She's the best," Daniel agreed without hesitation. Richard took a deep breath, gathering all his courage. He looked into the eyes of his son, the center of his universe, and asked the question he had held in his heart for months. "Daniel, would you like it if Emily were your mum?" The question hung in the air, simple yet loaded with the weight of all his hopes and fears. Daniel didn't answer right away. He blinked, processing the enormity of the question. It wasn't something his father had ever asked before. He looked at his hands, then back at Richard's anxious face. Then, with the pure clarity and honesty that only a child possesses, he answered, "Yes, Dad." The word was a whisper, but to Richard it sounded like a thunderclap of relief. But Daniel wasn't finished. "I really like her," the boy continued, his voice gaining confidence. He sat up in bed, his thoughts organizing. "She plays dinosaurs with me and doesn't think it's boring. She really listens when I talk, and she hugs me when I'm sad." He paused, and his next words were the ones that finally broke Richard's emotional dam. "None of your other girlfriends were like that," Daniel said, with a wisdom far beyond his 5 years. "They were pretty, but they didn't look at me. Not really. None of them took care of me like she does. None of them took care of me like she does." The sentence hit Richard with the force of a wave of joy, of vindication, of a love for his son so deep it left him breathless. It wasn't just that Daniel liked Emily, it was that he, in his innocence, had perfectly understood the difference. He had felt the absence of care before, and now he recognized the presence of genuine love. He hadn't been fooled by fake smiles or superficial beauty. His little heart knew, from the very beginning, what was real. Hot, silent tears began to stream down Richard's face. He didn't try to stop them. They were tears of a happiness so pure it hurt. His whole crazy plan, his disguise, his fear, the pain of the revelation, it was all worth it to get to this moment, to this answer. He leaned in and pulled Daniel into the tightest, most heartfelt hug of his life. He buried his face in his son's hair, inhaling the scent of baby shampoo, feeling the small warm body against his. "I really like her too, son," he whispered, his voice choked. "A whole lot." They held each other for a long time. It was no longer just a father and a son. They were two allies, two hearts that had found their missing piece. When Richard finally pulled away, he wiped his tears and tucked Daniel's blanket in. "You can sleep now, champ," he said. Daniel snuggled into his pillows, a peaceful smile on his face, and closed his eyes. Richard watched him for several minutes, his heart overflowing. The decisive question had been answered, and the answer, coming from his son's mouth, wasn't just permission. It was a blessing. Now he knew what he had to do. The conversation with Daniel was the green light Richard's heart had been waiting for. The following weekend, on a sunny afternoon in the garden, he created the moment. There was no grand gesture, no expensive restaurant or planned flash mob. It was just the three of them, sitting on the grass after an afternoon of play. Daniel was a little ways off, chasing a butterfly, and Richard turned to Emily, whose face was lit up by the sun and happiness. He took her hand, the same work-calloused hand that had once offered him a sandwich, and held it with a reverent tenderness. "Emily," he began, his voice firm but filled with emotion, "I started a search for a mother for my son. But along the way I found my best friend, my safe harbor and the love of my life. I know our beginning was built on a lie, and I will spend the rest of my life proving my truth to you." He paused, looking into her eyes. "Daniel gave me his blessing. He said that none of the others took care of him like you do. And he's right. No one has ever taken care of me like you do. Will you marry me, Emily? Will you build a family with me and Daniel?" The tears that streamed down Emily's face were not of sadness or doubt, but of a joy so pure and overwhelming it left her speechless. She just nodded, laughing and crying at the same time, and threw herself into his arms. Daniel, seeing the commotion, ran to them and squeezed in between the hug, not fully understanding why, but knowing it was something good. In that moment, they were already a family. The wedding would just be the celebration. The world expected a spectacle. The union of billionaire Richard Sterling and a former cleaning lady was a feast for the tabloids. They predicted an extravagant event, an elite guest list, a couture gown, and a party that would last for days. They could not have been more wrong. Richard and Emily chose to have the ceremony in their own home, in the garden that had become the stage for so many happy moments. The guest list was restricted to fewer than 20 people. Emily's mother, who traveled to the city with eyes full of pride, Emily's former supervisor, a decent man who had always treated her with respect, Richard's right-hand man at the company, who knew his silent struggle, and a few other true friends. It was a wedding not for the world to see, but for them to feel. The day dawned clear and bright. Emily got ready in one of the guest rooms with her mother. She didn't wear a designer dress, but a simple silk gown in an ivory color that fell elegantly on her body, making her look ethereal and, above all, like herself. Looking in the mirror, she didn't see the invisible cleaner or the billionaire's girlfriend. She saw a woman who had learned to listen to her heart and who was about to marry the man she loved. Meanwhile, in his own room, Richard was being helped by his best man and ring-bearer, Daniel. The boy, dressed in a miniature suit that made him look like a little gentleman, was radiant. He helped his father adjust his tie with solemn seriousness, his face focused on his very important task. "You look handsome, Dad," Daniel said, stepping back to admire his work. "And you are the most dapper boy in the world," Richard replied, kneeling to be at his level. "Are you ready for your part?" "Yes," Daniel exclaimed. "I'm going to carry the rings and I won't drop them. It's the most important job." Richard hugged him tightly. "You already did the most important job, son. You showed me the way here." The ceremony was set up under an arch of white flowers in the garden, with the blue ocean as a backdrop. When the soft music began to play, and Emily walked down the grassy path on her mother's arm, a moved silence fell over the few guests. Richard felt the air catch in his lungs. She was more beautiful than he could have ever imagined. But it was the sight of Daniel that moved him even more. The boy stood beside him, and when he saw Emily approaching, a smile so big and luminous spread across his face, it seemed it could light up the whole world. It was the smile of arrival, of certainty, of a deep wish finally coming true. The vows they exchanged were not taken from a book. They were written from their hearts, telling their unique story. "Emily," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion, holding her hands. "I was lost in a world of appearances, rich in everything except what mattered. The day you shared your lunch with a stranger, you didn't just feed him. You showed me what kindness was. You saw me when I was invisible. I promise to spend every day of my life honoring your trust, being the man you deserve. I promise to be your partner, your friend, and with Daniel, to build a home filled not with luxury, but with love and, above all, truth. I love you." Emily, with tears in her eyes, responded with the same sincerity. "Richard, you came into my life in the most unexpected way. You showed me that a person's heart isn't defined by their clothes or their bank account. You taught me to have the courage to dream. I promise to love you unconditionally, to laugh with you in joy and support you in sorrow. And I promise you, and you, Daniel," she said, looking at the boy, "to love and protect our family with everything I am. I love you." When it was time for the rings, Daniel walked up to them holding a small cushion with immense pride. He delivered the rings with meticulous care, his face beaming with happiness at his central role in this moment. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, and Richard kissed Emily under the afternoon sun, a small hurricane of joy could no longer contain itself. Before the kiss even ended, Daniel ran to them and threw himself into a tight hug, wrapping his arms around both of their legs. Richard and Emily laughed through their tears and bent down to embrace him, turning a couple's hug into the new Sterling family's first official embrace. The celebration that followed was as simple and moving as the ceremony. A long table was set in the garden, where everyone shared a delicious meal, lively conversation, and much laughter. There were no tabloid photographers, no pompous speeches. There was only warmth, friendship, and a palpable happiness. Daniel was the epicenter of this happiness. He couldn't stand still, running from one place to another, joy radiating from every pore. He pulled Emily's mother by the hand to show her his swing set, and proudly introduced her. "Grandma, this is my mom, Emily." The word "mom" came out of his mouth with a naturalness and delight that made Richard's heart overflow every time he heard it. He was radiant, not just happy. It was the deep, secure happiness of a child who had finally found his place in the world, of a puzzle that was finally complete. He was no longer the lonely boy watching other children from afar. He was the center of his own happy family. Late in the afternoon, Richard stepped back for a moment and watched the scene. He saw Emily sitting on the grass with Daniel on her lap, both of them laughing at something she whispered in his ear. The setting sun enveloped them in a golden glow. In that moment, Richard Sterling, the billionaire, the titan of industry, understood the true meaning of wealth. It wasn't in his buildings, in his stocks, or in his bank account. It was there in that shared laughter, in that secure hug, in the peace of finally having a complete family, and he was the richest man in the world. The months following the wedding were a period of beautiful and serene adjustment. The mansion, once a symbol of an unattainable world for Emily, transformed into a vibrant home, its once silent walls now echoing with Daniel's laughter and the soft melodies Emily liked to listen to while she cooked. They became a family in the truest sense of the word, building their daily traditions: dinosaur-shaped pancakes on Saturdays, movie nights with a giant bowl of popcorn, and sunset walks on the private beach that stretched beyond their garden. Richard had never felt so complete. Emily's presence and Daniel's overflowing happiness had filled a void in his soul he hadn't even known was so vast. He watched in wonder as the woman he fell in love with blossomed in her new environment, not because of the luxury, but because of the security and love that surrounded her. However, he began to notice a thoughtful quietness in Emily during peaceful moments. She seemed to be contemplating something profound, a horizon only she could see. He never pressed her, trusting that, according to their promise, she would come to him when she was ready. That time came on an autumn evening, about 6 months after the wedding. They had just put Daniel to bed, reading to him until his eyes fluttered shut with a smile on his face. They went down to the large library, a sanctuary of knowledge with book-lined walls. As Richard poured 2 cups of tea, Emily stood before a section dedicated to economics and social development. She traced the spine of a book with her finger, her mind miles away. "It's incredible to think," she said softly, more to herself than to him, "that there's so much knowledge in the world, so many tools to make a difference." Richard approached and handed her the cup, watching her profile in the soft lamplight. "What's in your heart, Emily?" She turned to him, her eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and a newfound determination. "I've been thinking a lot, Richard, about everything, about this life, about us, about the future. And I need you to know that every day by your and Daniel's side is a gift. You've given me a world I never dared to dream of. But now that I'm here, safe and loved, the dreams I kept tucked away for so long are starting to call to me again." She led him to a pair of comfortable leather armchairs near the unlit fireplace. "When I was a girl, before life became a daily struggle, I dreamed of going to college. I didn't dream of being rich or famous. I dreamed of learning, of understanding how the world works, of having the tools to build something, no matter how small." Her voice was a whisper laden with years of unfulfilled desire. "I had to give up that dream to help my mom, to survive. It became a luxury, a fantasy for another life. But now I have time to think. And I've realized something." She faced him, vulnerability and strength warring in her gaze. "I don't want to live in your shadow, Richard. I don't want my identity to be just Richard Sterling's wife. I love you with all my heart. But to be the best partner for you and the best mother for Daniel, I need to be the best version of myself. I want to be somebody in my own right. I want our son to see his mother not just as someone who loves him, but as someone who had the courage to chase her own horizons." She expected hesitation, perhaps a gentle offer for her to manage a charity or simply enjoy life. What she didn't expect was the light of immense pride that ignited in Richard's eyes. He leaned forward, taking her hands in his. "Emily, the woman I fell in love with wasn't a damsel in distress. She was a warrior with a gentle heart, the woman who faced the world every day with dignity, even when the world didn't see her. This desire to grow, to build, to be independent, that is the essence of the woman I love. Do you think I would ever want to extinguish that flame? I want to give it all the oxygen it needs to become a bonfire." The relief that washed over Emily was so profound, she felt tears well up. "Your dream is now our dream," Richard continued, his voice full of conviction. "Your courage inspires me. Tell me what you want to do and we will make it happen. Together." And so a new chapter began. Emily started her studies in business administration with a focus on social entrepreneurship. Her determination was fierce. She dove into her books with the hunger of someone who had been deprived of knowledge for too long. The library lights stayed on late into the night, long after Daniel and even Richard had gone to bed. She faced the challenge of being an older student, the anxiety of exams, and the complexity of subjects that were entirely new to her. But she never wavered. The support of her family was her foundation. Richard became her biggest champion. He rearranged his schedule to be home earlier, taking over Daniel's bedtime routine so Emily could have uninterrupted hours of study. He listened patiently as she explained complex economic theories, his face beaming with pride at her intelligence and passion. He wasn't just a supportive husband, he was a study partner, a mentor, and her #1 fan. Daniel, in his pure, childish way, was also a pillar of support. He understood that mommy has homework and would often sit beside her with his own coloring books, doing his work in companionable silence. He brought her drawings to decorate her binder, and when she looked tired, he would give her hugs that he called energy hugs. He was proud of his mom, and his unconditional love was the fuel that kept her going. The years passed, not as a blur, but as a series of meaningful moments, of bricks being carefully laid to build a solid life. Emily's graduation was one of the happiest days of their lives. Richard and Daniel were in the front row, cheering louder than anyone as she crossed the stage to receive her diploma, her face radiant with accomplishment. True to her word, Emily didn't stop there. With Richard's support and partnership, she founded the Seed Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing scholarships and mentorship to low-income youth who, like her, had the dream of education but not the means. She wasn't just the funder's wife, she was the driving force as the CEO, using her academic knowledge and life experience to create real impact. Together, they built a family that was much more than the sum of its parts. It was a unit forged in mutual respect, unconditional love and shared dreams. They taught Daniel not by what they said, but by what they did, that love is support, that strength is kindness, and that true success is measured by the good you do in the world. On a warm summer afternoon, nearly a decade after that first meeting in the square, Richard stood on the balcony, watching the scene in his garden. Daniel, now a bright and compassionate preteen, was helping Emily tend to the bed of sunflowers they planted every year, a tradition that had started with a single seed in a small pot. Their laughter floated on the air, a melody that was the soundtrack of his life. Richard looked at his home, at the sparkling ocean in the distance, at the symbols of a wealth the world envied, and he smiled. He remembered the desperate man who had once dressed as a beggar, a man who possessed everything and had nothing, a man who thought wealth could solve his problems, only to find it was the cause of his deepest emptiness. He looked again at his wife and son. He saw the kindness in Emily's eyes, a kindness that had rescued his soul. He saw the happy, secure smile on Daniel's face, a smile that was the direct result of that love. And finally, with absolute and peaceful clarity, Richard understood. His greatest fortune was not in the buildings that bore his name, nor in the numbers in his bank account. It never had been. His true, immeasurable, and eternal fortune was right there, in the warmth of the sun, in his son's laughter, and in the love of an extraordinary woman who taught him to see the world not through the lens of wealth, but through the redeeming power of a pure heart. And he was, without a shadow of a doubt, the richest man in the world. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.